In the city of Toronto, a clash is underway that lays bare the inner workings of political priorities disguised as traffic policy. On the surface, it appears to be a squabble over bike lanes, thin strips of painted pavement lined with plastic bollards. But don't be fooled. This is a battleground in the war over urban space, democracy, and the right to live and move safely in the city. When the Ontario Superior Court granted a temporary injunction on April 22, 2025, blocking Premier Doug Ford's attempt to rip out bike lanes from Bloor Street West, Yonge Street, and University Avenue, it wasn't just stopping a bit of road work, it was halting a bulldozer driven by ideology. The court, perhaps for a moment, slammed on the brakes of a government that too often governs like a runaway freight train, fast, noisy, and completely oblivious to who's getting run over. The Ford government's attempt to remove protected cycling infrastructure, passed into law via Bill 212 dubbed the Reducing Gridlock Saving You Time Act, was dressed up in the language of efficiency. But, as with most things under the guise of urbanism, efficiency is a mask. Behind it is a cynical calculation of whose lives matter and whose do not. This law not only granted Queen's Park power to strip Toronto of its bike lanes without municipal consent, it made a mockery of the democratic governance and system. The injunction granted by Justice Paul Shabas amounts to a legal firewall, a momentary reprieve before the province does to bike lanes what capital has long done to public goods: dismantle them for a short-term political return. And make no mistake, that is what this is: an electioneering gambit dressed up as infrastructure policy. At the heart of the legal argument lies Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which protects life, liberty, and the security of the person. The question before the court is sobering. Does forcing vulnerable road users into dangerous traffic conditions constitute a violation of these rights? The plaintiffs argue that it does, and with good reason. The evidence presented by Eco-Justice and other advocates painted a picture that should shame any government pretending to act in the public interest. Removing the bike lanes, especially in areas where cycling is not a lifestyle choice but an economic necessity, where food couriers, gig workers, and low-income residents depend on it, would be tantamount to sending them into a battlefield with no armor. That is what the roads are, battlefields shaped by class. Who gets a steel tank called a car? Who gets exposed to the elements in the engines? The answer is written in the asphalt. Doug Ford's reaction was pure demagoguery. He derided the judiciary as unelected judges who were standing in the way of his government's will, as though democracy ends once he's elected. In his telling, this is about the right to drive freely without hindrance, but let's not kid ourselves. This is about who the streets are for. Are they for people, or are they for machines? For the working class, or for suburban commuters in Ford Nation's SUV parade? In cities, space is power, and when that space is given to vulnerable road users, cyclists, pedestrians, transit riders, it redistributes some of that power. That's what's really at stake here, the redistribution of mobility. And Ford, like every good servant of the capitalist class, knows that redistribution, even in bike lane form, is a threat. The province's own internal documents, leaked last fall, torpedoed their arguments like a self-inflicted torpedo through the hull of their own ship. Their own transportation analysis showed that removing bike lanes wouldn't meaningfully improve congestion. Worse, it would increase injuries and collisions. A report concluded that cyclist injuries could rise by over 50%, a number that should stop any responsible government in its tracks. But not this one, because what Doug Ford's government is doing is not about improving transportation. It's about appealing to a constituency that views bike lanes as symbols of downtown elites, of urban interference, of left-wing policy. In short, bike lanes have become class totems, markers of who the streets are for, and so the bulldozer gets revved up, not to build, but to tear down. Let's not forget that these bike lanes didn't appear out of nowhere. They were approved by Toronto City Council, developed through data-driven urban planning, and installed with consultation and support from communities, businesses, and safety advocates. What the Ford government has done is reach into the city's affairs like a landlord evicting tenants from a property he doesn't live in but insists on controlling. This is a classic expression of neoliberal governance, rule from above, removal of local democracy, and the centralization of power in the hands of those who benefit most from chaos and disempowerment. Under capitalism, control always flows upwards, while risk is pushed downwards, onto workers, cyclists, pedestrians, and people who can't afford to escape the consequences of the elite's decisions. The financial costs are equally maddening. Tearing out bike lanes that could cost up to $48 million, money flushed down the storm drain of political spite. This money could be used to fund public transit, to improve bus shelters, to build affordable housing. But in Ford's Ontario, spectacle trumps service. He's playing a political shell game, moving around taxpayer dollars to appease a voter base that wants to see motion, even if it means backwards motion. It's the illusion of progress. Make noise, stir up resentment, and pretend the hammer of government is falling on waste, when in fact it is destroying infrastructure that saves lives, reduces emissions, and expands access to the city. And what's the environmental impact? Every ripped-out bike lane will push more people into cars. More cars means more emissions, more air pollution, more respiratory illness, and more traffic. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Under any rational system, one that values health, sustainability, and safety, bike lanes would be expanded, not destroyed. But capitalism doesn't operate on rational principles. It operates on profit, on spectacle, and on the illusion of control. Ford isn't interested in facts. He's interested in optics. And in this case, the optics of erasing bike lanes plays well with voters who see cyclists not as fellow citizens, but as nuisances, another wedge issue in the ongoing campaign to divide working people against each other. This injunction is not a solution, but a stay of execution. It's a court telling the government, slow down, people could die. It gives us time to mount a broader defense, not just of bike lanes, but of the principle that infrastructure must serve the many, not the few. If the charter challenge succeeds, it could set a powerful precedent that governments cannot expose people to unnecessary harm in pursuit of political gain. That the right to safe mobility is not a luxury, but a constitutional protection, and that our streets belong to all of us, not just to the loudest or the most motorized. What we're witnessing here is a microcosm of the larger contradictions of capitalism and political ideology. The city, that dense mosaic of people, labor, and movement, becomes a chessboard for class war. Infrastructure decisions become class decisions. The removal of bike lanes isn't just about how traffic flows, it's about who gets to move, who gets to live safely, and who gets left behind. If bike lanes represent a redistribution of space in the public realm, then their destruction is an act of reprivatization, returning public goods to the domain of the automobile, of fossil fuels, and of those who can afford to insulate themselves from danger. In the end, this injunction is a line drawn in the concrete. It asks, who gets to shape the city? Who gets to decide who the streets are for? If we allow governments to erase infrastructure designed to protect the vulnerable, then we're not just letting them remove bike lanes, we're letting them redraw the boundaries of citizenship itself. And so, the fight must go on, in the courts, in the streets, and in public discourse. Because every time a bike lane is protected, it's not just a victory for cyclists, it's a victory for democracy, for equity, and for the idea that public space can and should serve the public good. So yes, this fight is about more than just paint and plastic posts. It's about whether we want cities that function like fortresses for the privileged or communities that embrace and protect the many. That's what the injunction defends. A small, crucial piece of the commons in a world where the commons are under siege. And as long as that siege continues, we must resist with every tool available, legal, political, and rhetorical, because justice, like a cyclist, needs protection if it's ever going to make it home. I hope that you liked the video. If so, please give it a like. If you're not subscribed and want to be notified of new videos that are released, please click on the Art Toronto button here. This is the video that I would recommend for you to watch next, and I'm sure that you're going to love it. Here's the playlist for all of the latest in transit news and views that you're going to find very informative and interesting. And finally, here is the latest video. Thanks for watching and happy transiting.